You won't believe what happens when a homeless man saves the life of a billionaire CEO. This isn't some fairy tale with a happy ending crafted in Hollywood. This is real, raw, and filled with lessons you won't find in any textbook. The twist? It's not just about saving a life, it's about everything that happens afterward. Stick with us, because this story will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about success, kindness, and fate. Imagine this: you're at the lowest point in your life. You've hit rock bottom, and the world feels like it's turned its back on you. You have nothing but the clothes on your back, and even the hope you once had seems to have vanished. You don't have a job, a home, or anyone to turn to for help. Now imagine you're standing in front of a man who has it all: wealth, power, a mansion that could fit your entire town, and fame that makes him untouchable. This man, Michael Grant, a billionaire CEO, seems to have everything. But on one cold, fateful day, his life hangs in the balance. And then, in the blink of an eye, you're the one who saves him. This isn't some fantasy we're talking about. This is a true story of fate, kindness, and the unexpected power of a single act of compassion. The homeless man who saved Michael Grant's life didn't just help him physically, he showed him that the wealth and fame he spent his life chasing meant absolutely nothing compared to the value of human connection. In this video, you're going to witness a journey from despair to hope, from hopelessness to a bond that transcends all boundaries. You'll witness how one man, with nothing, gave everything when it mattered most, and how that act changed both of their lives forever. Let me tell you about Jason. Jason wasn't always homeless. In fact, he didn't start his life on the streets, and he wasn't born into hardship or isolation. For a long time, he had a life that most people would envy. A life that was filled with purpose, friends, and stability. Jason worked as a mechanic, and anyone who knew him would tell you he was the kind of guy you could always count on. He had a knack for fixing things: engines, cars, machines. He could make anything run smoothly. People trusted him not just for his skills but for his reliability. He was the guy who'd always show up on time, the one who'd lend a hand when you needed it most. His workshop was filled with old tools and new friendships. He had a roof over his head, a steady job, and a community around him that made him feel safe. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. He was content. But as with many stories, life doesn't always stay the way we want it to. Everything started unraveling when Jason's life took a dark turn, a chain of unfortunate events that he never saw coming. The first blow was his divorce. The woman he had loved for years, the one he had built his life with, walked away. The emotional toll was more devastating than he could have ever imagined. Jason lost more than just a partner. He lost his sense of stability, his sense of self. The woman he thought he would grow old with was now gone, and with her went his belief in the life he had built. The loneliness was suffocating, and with it came a self-doubt that would haunt him for months to come. But as if that wasn't enough, his job went next. One morning, he showed up to work, as he always did, only to be handed a pink slip. The company was downsizing, and despite his years of hard work, he was left out in the cold. His co-workers, who had once been friends, now avoided him. No one could understand what he was going through, and Jason found himself spiraling deeper into a hole he couldn't escape. Losing his job meant losing everything: the routine, the respect, the sense of purpose he had spent years building. Jason didn't know how to recover from that, especially when he had no one left to turn to. Now, with nowhere to go and no way to support himself, Jason found himself on the streets. It happened gradually, one bad decision after another, one setback after another, until he was forced to sleep on a park bench, staring up at the stars and wondering how things had gone so wrong. He wasn't used to feeling so small. He wasn't used to being hungry. He wasn't used to the cold, the biting wind that cut through his jacket like a knife. And he definitely wasn't used to having nothing. Nothing but the clothes on his back, a small, crumpled blanket, and the same aching emptiness he felt deep inside. He had no family to call, no friends who could help, and no way out of his situation. But here's where something incredible happened. Even in the depths of his despair, Jason never gave up on kindness. He may have lost everything else, his home, his job, his dignity, but he never lost his heart. He had nothing left to give, yet somehow he still found a way to give. On those long, cold nights, Jason would meet other people who had also fallen on hard times. He didn't have much, but when someone came asking for help, Jason didn't hesitate. He'd share the last of his food, the little bit of change he had, or the warmth of his blanket. He would offer a kind word or a smile to someone else who looked just as broken as he felt. He knew what it was like to be invisible, to feel forgotten, and that's why he never turned anyone away. It became a routine for Jason, helping others even when he was down to his last bit of bread, lending a hand even when his own hands were empty. He didn't need much to help someone else. His belief in the goodness of people remained strong, even when the world around him seemed to be falling apart. He could have turned bitter, he could have let the harshness of the streets consume him, but he refused. Instead, Jason clung to the idea that if he kept showing kindness, maybe, just maybe, something good would come from it. On those freezing nights, with the wind howling and the streets empty, Jason would wrap himself in his thin blanket, his body shivering against the cold. He would lay on the park bench, trying to sleep, but his mind would race, his thoughts tangled in the same cycle of doubt and uncertainty. It felt like the world had moved on without him, forgotten that he ever existed. And yet, even in those darkest moments, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just the hope that there was more to life than the street corner he called home. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when, but deep inside, Jason knew that his life was on the verge of a change, one that would be far bigger than anything he could have imagined. He just had to hold on a little longer. Now, let's shift our focus to Michael Grant. If there was ever a man who seemed to have it all, it was Michael. He wasn't just a CEO. He was the CEO of one of the biggest tech empires in the world, the kind of company that controlled industries and shaped the future. His name was synonymous with success, and the world saw him as a symbol of everything people strive for: power, wealth, and influence. He had more than enough money to last several lifetimes, a penthouse that overlooked the skyline, private jets to whisk him away to exotic locations whenever he felt like it, and a bank account with so many zeros it almost seemed fake. Michael had everything the world tells you will bring happiness, luxury, status, and comfort. But here's the thing, despite all of this, Michael felt emptier than ever. The trappings of success hadn't given him the peace he longed for. In fact, they had done the opposite. He was a man surrounded by wealth and adoration, yet somehow, he felt completely alone. Fame had only isolated him further, and his money had become a cage rather than a key to freedom. The expensive dinners, the constant meetings with high-profile investors, and the endless cycle of achievements and accolades, it was all starting to feel like an empty race with no finish line. Every day, he climbed higher and higher in the business world, only to feel more disconnected from the people around him. He was constantly chasing something he couldn't name, a feeling of fulfillment, a deeper sense of purpose, but no matter how much he achieved, it was always just out of reach. In the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the sense that something was missing, that the life he'd built was somehow hollow. Michael had everything anyone could ever dream of. But behind the polished exterior, there was a man fighting internal battles that no amount of money could solve. The pressure of running an empire, the weight of endless responsibilities, the expectations that never ceased, these things were starting to take a toll on him. And yet, the more he climbed the ladder of success, the further away he seemed to get from the person he used to be, from the man who had started with nothing and dreamed big. Every promotion, every business deal, every victory seemed to bring him closer to burnout and farther from happiness. He had lost sight of why he started this journey in the first place. On one particularly stressful morning, after a sleepless night filled with anxiety and mounting pressure from every direction, Michael reached his breaking point. He was buried under a pile of work, deadlines, meetings, calls with investors, and a deal that could either make or break his company. The weight of it all was suffocating, and for the first time in a long time, he couldn't breathe. He felt like he was drowning in responsibilities that were no longer rewarding, tasks that felt meaningless in the grand scheme of things. He needed a break, something to clear his mind, to step away from the constant buzz of corporate life. Without a second thought, he decided to take a walk, something simple, something grounding. He left his luxurious high-rise office behind and made his way to a nearby park, hoping that the fresh air would provide the clarity he so desperately needed. Michael's mind raced as he walked through the park, the cool air brushing against his face, the sound of leaves rustling in the trees barely reaching his ears. He was used to the hum of the city, the non-stop noise of his life, but right then, all he wanted was silence, just a moment where he didn't have to think about the next big decision, the next big deal, the next pressure on his shoulders. But as he walked, he felt an unusual tightness in his chest, a warning he had ignored for far too long. His body, worn out by years of stress and unhealthy habits, was now sending him a message he could no longer ignore. The world around him seemed to blur, and before he knew it, his vision darkened. His legs gave out, and Michael collapsed onto the cold pavement of the park. His heart, which had been running on overdrive for years, finally gave out. The man who seemed untouchable, who had everything in the world, was now lying on the ground, fighting for his life. People in the park walked by, not noticing the CEO who had just fallen. After all, who would pay attention to a wealthy man in a sharp suit, someone whose life appeared perfect from the outside? But Michael wasn't the untouchable CEO anymore, he was just another man in desperate need of help. His fall was unnoticed, at first. He was alone, vulnerable, and in that moment, everything he had achieved didn't matter. The reality was brutal. He had been so focused on his empire that he had neglected the most important thing of all, his health, his well-being, and his relationships. And now, in the most dramatic and unexpected way, the very man who had built a multi-billion-dollar business was face-to-face with his own mortality. Help was coming, but it was coming from the most unlikely source, someone who had nothing but a heart full of compassion, someone who didn't have an office or a title or a fortune. It was someone who understood the true value of life in a way that Michael never could, someone who would give him something far more valuable than money. And that's where the story truly begins. There, in the cold, under the shadow of towering skyscrapers, Jason sat huddled on a park bench, his body shivering from the harsh winter chill. He had become a fixture in the park over the past few months, a forgotten soul amidst the hustle and bustle of the city. People walked by him every day, their eyes purposely avoiding his, as if his existence was nothing more than an inconvenience to their daily routine. But Jason didn't mind. He had learned to accept his place in the world, and he had learned that kindness was often in short supply, especially for people like him. But that day, fate had a different plan. As Jason pulled his thin, worn blanket tighter around him to ward off the cold, something caught his eye. Across the park, a man in a sharp suit stumbled, his face contorting in pain. Jason could see the man struggle, his hand clutching his chest as he tried to take another step but failed. Then, with a final, desperate gasp, the man crumpled to the ground. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had seen people collapse before, many of them from exhaustion, or worse. But this was different. There was something urgent in the air. Without thinking, without hesitation, Jason sprang to his feet. It didn't matter who this man was. It didn't matter that he was well-dressed, or that he could probably afford the best healthcare money could buy. In that moment, all that mattered was that someone needed help, and Jason was the only one close enough to give it. His feet moved quickly, the cold biting at his heels, but his focus was sharp. When he reached Michael, he saw the CEO's face pale, his breath ragged, his body barely clinging to life. Jason didn't think twice. He had no time for doubts or questions. The knowledge he'd picked up from his days as a mechanic, fixing engines, understanding how things worked under pressure, had taught him one fundamental truth: when someone's life is at stake, you act. No second guessing, no waiting for someone more qualified. You just act. Jason knelt beside Michael, who was still gasping, barely conscious, and immediately placed his hands on Michael's chest. His palms were cold, but it didn't matter. His own heart raced, his breath quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He began CPR, his hands pressing hard, pumping his chest in rhythm, hoping, praying, that the man's heart would start again. Jason had no formal medical training, but he had learned enough from the years spent helping people in the shop, patching up cars and putting them back on the road. With every push of his hands, time seemed to stretch out. Seconds felt like minutes, and minutes like hours. The park around him was still, the world had almost frozen. People stood in a circle, gawking in disbelief, too stunned to help. Jason didn't care. His focus was on one thing, keeping this man alive. The ache in his own stomach, the cold gnawing at his bones, all of it faded into the background. None of it mattered now. He just needed to keep going. But time, as it often does, moved too slowly. Jason's arms burned with the strain, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. This was it, his moment to make a difference, his chance to do something that mattered. The world was watching, but in Jason's mind, there was only Michael, fighting for breath, fighting for life. The sirens in the distance grew louder, signaling that help was on the way, but Jason knew that by the time the paramedics arrived, it might be too late. Then, just as he was beginning to feel the weight of exhaustion threaten to overtake him, a miracle happened. Michael's body gave a small, involuntary jerk, a faint gasp escaping his lips. Jason didn't stop, he pushed harder, his hands working with renewed energy. And then, it happened. Michael's chest rose, his breathing more stable. It was the most beautiful sound Jason had ever heard. The paramedics arrived moments later, their sirens cutting through the tension in the air. But when they took over, it was clear, Michael had been revived. His heart was beating again, not because of a machine, but because of Jason, a homeless man who had nothing but his will to help. Jason had given everything he had in that moment, and it had been enough. Michael, still groggy and disoriented, was carefully loaded onto the stretcher by the paramedics. As they worked, Michael's eyes fluttered open. Through the haze of pain and confusion, he looked up and saw the man who had saved him. A man he had overlooked just minutes before, a man who appeared to have nothing. Jason stood there, a scruffy, tired figure in worn clothes, looking back at him with quiet determination in his eyes. For Michael, everything shifted in that instant. He had lived his entire life chasing after success, after wealth, after the things he thought would bring him fulfillment. But here, in front of him, was a man who had nothing, a man who was willing to sacrifice everything to save him. The realization hit Michael with the force of a freight train. His wealth, his status, his empire, none of it could save him in that moment. But this man, this stranger who had nothing, had given him his life back. Jason hadn't just saved his body. He had given Michael a second chance, a chance to reflect, to reconsider everything he had taken for granted. For Michael, it wasn't just about being alive. It was about understanding the true meaning of sacrifice, kindness, and what it really meant to be a human being. In that one moment, when Jason knelt down beside him and gave him everything he had, Michael realized that he had been living his life all wrong. Jason hadn't just saved him from death, he had reminded him what it meant to live. And that, no amount of money or fame could ever replace. Days passed, and Michael slowly recovered. Physically, he was on his feet again, his life returning to a semblance of normalcy, but emotionally and mentally, something had shifted. Despite the whirlwind of meetings, the endless conference calls, and the promises he had made to investors, Michael couldn't shake the image of Jason from his mind. The man who had saved him wasn't just a stranger, he was the embodiment of selflessness, a man who had sacrificed his last ounce of energy to give Michael a second chance at life. Michael had interacted with countless people over the years, business partners, clients, employees, but none had made the impact on him that Jason had. The reality of it all weighed heavily on him. This man, this homeless stranger, had saved him when his own wealth, power, and connections had been completely useless. It was a hard truth to swallow. For all of his success, for all of his material wealth, Michael had lacked the very thing Jason had shown him in that critical moment: humanity. The more Michael thought about it, the more he realized that all the success in the world meant nothing if you were disconnected from the people around you. It was a humbling realization, and one that would forever alter his perspective on life. In his pursuit of success, he had lost touch with what truly mattered: human connection. The simple, raw kindness that Jason had shown him reminded him of something much more valuable than anything money could buy: the power of empathy and the ability to reach out when someone is in need. Michael could no longer ignore the calling in his heart. He had to find Jason. He had to make things right. Not just for himself, but for the man who had given him a new lease on life. So, Michael spent days combing the streets, asking around, talking to the people who knew the area, and getting leads from anyone who might have seen Jason since the incident. He asked shopkeepers, park-goers, and even street vendors. It wasn't easy, but the more he thought about Jason, the more he knew that this wasn't just a chance encounter, it was fate. The universe had crossed their paths for a reason. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Michael found him. Jason was sitting on the same park bench where everything had begun, the place where the two men's fates had collided. Michael approached him cautiously, unsure of how Jason would react. It had been days, and Jason might have had time to process what had happened. Maybe he was bitter or angry at the world for putting him in that position. Maybe he didn't even want to talk to Michael at all. But when Jason looked up and saw Michael standing there, he didn't flinch or pull away. He just stared for a moment, his face a mixture of surprise and confusion. "Jason?" Michael said softly, almost unsure of his own voice. "I need to talk to you." Jason blinked, as if trying to place the face that had been haunting him for days. "Yeah? What's this about?" The moment was delicate, and Michael knew it. He could have easily taken the route many would have, offering money, offering a handout, offering pity. But that wasn't why he was here. He wasn't here to play the hero. He was here because he had come to understand that Jason was more than just a charity case or a feel-good story. Jason was a person, one who had shown him more humanity than most of the people he surrounded himself with. "I came to thank you," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with genuine gratitude. "I came because I owe you more than words can say. You saved my life, Jason. And I want to make sure you know that you're not just some random guy I met. You're not a project or someone to fix. I want to offer you a job. But more importantly, I want to offer you something that's more important than anything I could ever give you: friendship." Jason was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowing as he tried to process what Michael had said. It wasn't just the offer of a job, it was the offer of something deeper. Something that Jason had long given up on believing was possible: genuine human connection. In his world, people had always been a means to an end. He had learned to survive by keeping his distance, by not expecting too much from anyone. But here was Michael Grant, a billionaire CEO, offering something that didn't have a price tag attached to it. "You're serious?" Jason asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You're not here to throw a check at me or take some photo op? You're offering me a job, and you want to be friends?" Michael nodded, his eyes unwavering. "Absolutely. I don't care about your past. I care about what you did for me. And I care about you as a person. I've spent my life chasing success, but what I realized when you saved me was that none of that matters if you don't have meaningful connections with the people around you. I want you to come work with me, yes, but more than that, I want you to know that you matter." Jason's heart swelled with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. He had been living on the streets for so long, disconnected from society, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be valued for who he was, not for what he had or didn't have. To be treated with dignity, by someone who didn't have to. For Jason, this moment was a turning point. A man who had nothing now found himself in front of someone who believed in him. A man who had given up on himself now found someone who hadn't given up on him. This wasn't just about a paycheck. This wasn't about survival. This was about the chance to rebuild. It was about dignity. It was about respect. It was about the realization that maybe, just maybe, he was worth something, not just to the world, but to someone who truly cared. The weight of it all hit Jason at once. He had been living with the belief that he was invisible, that his struggles, his pain, his existence didn't matter. But here, in this moment, in front of Michael, everything changed. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was a person with worth, with value, and most importantly, he was someone who had made a difference in someone else's life. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline. For Michael, this wasn't about saving Jason. It was about being reminded of the power of human connection. It was about realizing that sometimes, the people who have the least can teach us the most. And in that moment, Michael knew that his life had been forever changed, not by the money he had, or the empire he built, but by the man who had saved him with nothing but his heart. At first, it seemed like a fairy tale unfolding. Jason, the homeless man who had saved Michael's life, was given a fresh start. Michael, in his gratitude and newfound sense of purpose, offered him a job at his company. The kind of job most people could only dream of, a steady income, the chance to work in an environment filled with opportunity, and the promise of a better life. Jason, overwhelmed by the generosity, could hardly believe that this was his reality. He was grateful beyond measure, but as with most stories of redemption, the road to recovery wasn't as smooth as it appeared. For Jason, the adjustment was much harder than anyone expected. For years, he had lived on the streets, alone and without the comfort of a stable home or income. He had grown accustomed to relying solely on himself, trusting no one but his own instincts to survive. And in that harsh world, where every day was a fight for survival, he had developed a sense of emotional armor. To trust anyone, let alone accept the kind of help Michael was offering, felt like an impossible task. In many ways, Jason still felt like an outsider in this new world he had been thrust into. The comfort of a steady paycheck, the luxury of stability, and the possibility of building a future were all alien concepts to him. But it wasn't just a matter of getting used to the lifestyle. Jason's struggle ran much deeper. There was a voice in his head, a relentless reminder of everything he had lost. The weight of his past was suffocating, the failed marriage, the decisions that had led him to the streets, the mistakes he'd made along the way. His sense of self-worth had been shattered long before he found himself living on that cold park bench. And now, even though he had been offered a second chance, it wasn't just about money or a job, it was about a complete transformation of his identity. How could he feel deserving of something he had once believed was out of his reach? Every gesture of kindness from Michael, every offer of help, felt like a weight on Jason's shoulders. He didn't know how to accept it without feeling like a fraud. A part of him was deeply uncomfortable with the idea that someone would give him so much without asking for anything in return. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that his years on the streets had never allowed him to be. The notion that he could take from someone without giving anything back seemed impossible to him. How could he, a man who had once had everything and lost it all, ever repay the kindness Michael had shown him? As much as Michael tried to reassure him, Jason's internal battle raged on. He didn't know how to reconcile the man he had been with the man he wanted to become. There were days when he felt like a failure, convinced that he would never be able to live up to the expectations that had been placed on him. The pressure to change, to become someone who was worthy of this second chance, weighed heavily on his heart. And no matter how much Michael offered him, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't deserving of it. For Michael, the situation was equally frustrating. He had built an empire from the ground up, relying on vision, persistence, and determination. He understood the value of hard work and resilience. But Jason wasn't pushing back out of pride or arrogance, he was pushing back because he didn't know how to accept the help. Michael, who had spent years building walls around his own heart, understood the pain of isolation and loneliness. He had lived in a world of opulence, but it hadn't brought him the peace he longed for. When Jason rejected his kindness, it didn't make sense to him. He had worked so hard to offer Jason the opportunity he thought would change his life. But it wasn't that simple. Michael had once believed that wealth and power were the keys to happiness, only to find out the hard way that the most meaningful connections were the ones that couldn't be bought. He had learned the value of relationships, but Jason was a different kind of challenge. It wasn't about work or money, it was about healing, a journey that had to begin on the inside, long before it could show up on the outside. Despite Jason's resistance, Michael never gave up. He saw more than just a man struggling with the ghosts of his past. He saw a human being in desperate need of someone to believe in him. And Michael wasn't willing to let him go, not when Jason had saved his life and, in doing so, taught him more about human compassion than any business deal ever could. Michael knew that real change didn't happen overnight, and he wasn't giving up on Jason just because the road ahead was difficult. After all, he had learned that the most meaningful transformations often came from the most challenging situations. The question now was whether Jason could accept the help that Michael was offering, and whether he could find a way to forgive himself enough to believe that he truly deserved it. Michael understood that the path to healing was not as simple as giving Jason a job or a paycheck. He knew that true healing came from within, from the heart. It was about restoring Jason's sense of self-worth, helping him realize that his value wasn't tied to his material possessions or achievements, but rather to the person he was at his core. Michael made it his mission to show Jason that he was worthy of love, respect, and opportunity, not because of what he could offer to others, but simply because he existed. The journey was long, and the road ahead was full of emotional hurdles. Jason, despite his initial gratitude, still struggled with the trauma of his past. He had lived through years of hardship, and the scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep. There were many moments when Jason would retreat, overwhelmed by self-doubt, guilt, and the painful memories of his time on the streets. There were days when he felt like he couldn't take another step forward, convinced that he was too broken to ever really heal. And yet, Michael never wavered in his support. Michael understood that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't a straight line from pain to peace. It was a journey, full of setbacks, missteps, and moments of deep frustration. But each setback was a chance for growth, each misstep an opportunity for learning. Michael knew that, for Jason, this wasn't just about a job, it was about learning to trust again. It was about rediscovering his own worth in a world that had discarded him. And so, Michael took the time to show Jason what trust and patience looked like. He invited Jason to company events, introduced him to people who treated him with respect and dignity, not as a charity case, but as an equal. Slowly but surely, Jason began to see himself in a new light. He began to believe that he could have a future, that he didn't have to be defined by the man he had once been, the man who had been homeless and broken. Jason's confidence grew in small, almost imperceptible ways. He started to participate more in conversations, share his thoughts without fear of being judged. He learned to ask for help when he needed it, to open up without feeling like a burden. These small victories added up, and before long, Jason began to realize that he wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. But the true turning point came when Michael became more than just an employer. He became a mentor, a guide, and, in many ways, a mirror for Jason to reflect on his own potential. Michael wasn't just offering financial support, he was offering emotional guidance, helping Jason unpack the heavy baggage he had been carrying for years. They spent countless hours talking, not just about work, but about life, about mistakes, about regrets, and about the long, difficult road to redemption. Michael helped Jason confront the guilt he had been carrying for so long, the guilt of his failed marriage, the guilt of losing everything, and the guilt of believing he had no right to a better life. Through their conversations, Jason began to see that his past didn't have to define him. He wasn't the sum of his mistakes, he wasn't a lost cause. Michael showed him that the key to moving forward wasn't in erasing the past, but in accepting it. In acknowledging the pain, the mistakes, and the lessons learned, Jason could finally start to rebuild himself, piece by piece. It wasn't about forgetting where he came from, it was about understanding that his future was something he could shape with his own hands. The journey wasn't just a personal transformation for Jason, it became a catalyst for change in others as well. As Jason began to heal, he became more than just a success story, he became a symbol of hope for people who thought they were too broken to be fixed. His story showed that even those who had lost everything, even those who had hit rock bottom, could rise again if they were given the chance. And in that process, Jason became not just a beneficiary of Michael's kindness, but a living testament to the power of second chances. For Michael, the journey with Jason was life-changing. He had spent so many years chasing after money and power, believing that success was measured by wealth and status. But in helping Jason rebuild his life, Michael learned a far more valuable lesson. Success wasn't about what you had in your bank account, it was about the relationships you cultivated and the lives you touched. He saw the true value of connection, of offering a hand to someone who needed it, and of being there for someone not just when they were doing well, but when they were at their lowest. Through his mentorship, Michael gained a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly human, to be vulnerable, to be kind, and to help others rise. His connection with Jason became the most meaningful relationship of his life, a bond built on trust, compassion, and mutual respect. And as Jason continued to heal, Michael realized that the best part of his life wasn't the empire he had built, it was the impact he had on someone else's life, the opportunity to give someone a second chance and to watch them grow into the person they were always meant to be. Together, Michael and Jason showed the world that no matter how far you've fallen, there's always the possibility of rising again. And sometimes, the journey to healing isn't just about fixing what's broken, it's about finding the strength to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it seems. The true turning point in their journey came at a moment when everything seemed to be falling apart. Michael's company, which had once been a shining symbol of success, was now facing a crisis that threatened its very existence. A pivotal business deal that would secure the company's future had suddenly collapsed, and the entire team was scrambling to find a solution. The pressure was mounting, and for the first time in a long while, Michael felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. The strategies that had once worked for him and his team were failing, and no matter how hard they tried, the solution seemed out of reach. Michael, the invincible CEO who had built an empire from the ground up, was losing control. The uncertainty in the boardroom mirrored the uncertainty in his personal life, an uncertainty that had only grown since that fateful day in the park when Jason saved him. It was in this moment of desperation, when everything seemed bleak, that Jason stepped in. He wasn't the CEO. He wasn't a seasoned executive with decades of experience. He wasn't part of the world of high-stakes deals and corporate strategies. But he had something that no one else had, a fresh perspective. Jason had spent years on the streets, seeing the world through a lens that most people in the business world would never understand. He wasn't weighed down by the politics of the corporate world or the pressure of success. He was free from the confines of traditional thinking and had the kind of clarity that only someone with nothing to lose could possess. When Jason saw the turmoil in the company, he didn't approach it from a position of fear or frustration. Instead, he saw an opportunity to think differently. He suggested a new angle, a completely unconventional idea that no one else had considered. Michael was hesitant at first, but Jason's conviction was undeniable. This wasn't just some desperate, out-of-the-box thinking, this was a solution that made sense, a strategy that could turn everything around. In the end, Jason's idea not only salvaged the deal but also reshaped the company's future in ways no one had imagined. What began as a simple suggestion turned into a revolutionary strategy that changed the way the company did business. Jason's insight, born from a life of struggle and survival, had provided the spark that reignited the company's momentum. Michael and the entire team were stunned. But for Michael, this was more than just a business win, it was a profound moment of awe and realization. Jason, the homeless man who had once been dismissed by society and who had once been on the verge of giving up on life, had just saved the company. The same man who had come into Michael's life as a stranger, with nothing but a will to help, had now become an integral part of the business's success. Michael had witnessed Jason's personal transformation over the months, but this was something entirely different. This was Jason proving, in the most dramatic way possible, that a person's past does not define their future. Jason had gone from being a man who had lost everything to a man who could make a difference. His redemption wasn't just personal, it was professional, too. The homeless man who once had nothing to offer had just contributed the critical idea that would save everything Michael had worked for. In that moment, Michael saw the true power of second chances. He had never imagined that someone like Jason, someone who had once seemed so far removed from the world of business, could bring such a critical solution to the table. This moment proved that no matter where you come from, no matter how broken or lost you might feel, you can still make a difference. Jason's redemption was no longer just about his personal journey, it had become a testament to the power of transformation, resilience, and the belief that people could change. And for Michael, it was a moment of profound humility. He had helped Jason rebuild his life, but in return, Jason had helped him rebuild his company. They had both learned that the value of a person is not measured by their past, but by the potential of their future. In the end, it was clear that the bond between them was not just about saving one another, it was about growth, redemption, and the undeniable truth that anyone, no matter their background, could rise again. So, what can we truly take away from this incredible story? First and foremost, it teaches us the profound power of human kindness. A single, selfless act, a homeless man rushing to save a life, unleashed a chain of events that not only changed the lives of Jason and Michael but also altered the course of an entire company. This simple act of compassion revealed the truth that even in the darkest of times, a spark of kindness can ignite a transformation that no one could have predicted. Beyond that, the story reminds us that success is not about wealth, fame, or power. In fact, it shows us that the kind of success that truly matters doesn't come from what we have, but from the relationships we build and the impact we have on the people around us. True success is about lifting others up, about connection, empathy, and the way we rise together through life's challenges. It's the deep bonds we form and the ways we help each other that truly define what it means to succeed. Lastly, this story serves as an unshakable reminder that no one is beyond redemption. We all stumble. We all face struggles. We all experience moments when it feels like we've hit rock bottom. But Jason's journey demonstrates that it's never too late to change. No matter how far down we may fall, it's always possible to rise again. All it takes is the courage to believe that change is possible, and sometimes, all it takes is the kindness of a stranger to show us that the future can still hold something incredible. Jason's story isn't just about his personal redemption, it's a universal story about the capacity for growth, for healing, and for the transformative power of human connection. And it proves that, no matter where we start, we all have the ability to make a difference. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and check out the next video. The world is full of unexpected heroes, and we're here to share their stories with you. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss what's coming next.